Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Marina Ichon, Senior Vice President, and with me, as always, is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications. We're taping this podcast Monday, November 14th, and our guest is Clark Judge. Many of our listeners know that he is chairman of PRI, but he also runs the White House Writers Group, which is a firm that specializes in high-stakes communications. So he's going to be great at helping us unpack what happened in the midterms and what both parties ought to be thinking about as we head into the presidential campaign. But first, Tim, we've got our own political intrigues happening in the state. So tell us about what's happening with the speakership in the legislature.
Well, we have a winner. There is white smoke from the state capitol, and believe it or not, it was a 6-month battle to determine who would be the next Speaker of the Assembly, and it took another 6 hours, tense meeting of the returning and newly elected Assembly Democrats to figure out who the next Speaker would be. And they apparently got out Robert's Rules of Orders and actually Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedures, what guides the legislature. And they had dueling parliamentarians coming in. And at the end of the day, there was a compromise. And Robert Rivas was selected as, I guess he would be Speaker Designate. And he is expected to take office at the end of June 2023. And Anthony Rendon will be reelected Speaker in December and will serve until then. So I don't know why it took so long to kind of figure that out. I think a lot of what happened here is that Rendon wasn't ready to go, and he knew that he had to go at some point, but he wanted to go on his own terms. And Rivas coming to him with this speakership challenge last year really was sort of seen as a challenge to the king. And Rendon smartly did everything he could to hang on to power the rest of the year. But there's no question it was a very divisive thing for Assembly Democrats. They even formed rival political action committees. Each side was funneling money to a lot of safe Democrats rather than those in hot races to secure votes for one side or the other. Now, can they heal these wounds? Well, when Mr. Rivas becomes Speaker, he's going to have the best thing. He's going to have a lot of committee chairmanships to hand out. He's going to have the Assembly budget at his disposal. So there are a lot of things that the Speaker can do to mend fences and to soothe angry members. So we'll see what happens when he comes in June. But definitely, it seems like a lot of wasted angst and energy when, you would think reasonable people could figure this out.
Well, funny enough, it looks like the House is going to be relying on California to decide who's going to take over. I've been following 2 races here. Mike Garcia, it's not official yet, but looks like he's going to win in the 27th district. That's the area north of Pasadena in the Santa Clarita, Simi Valley area. That district had been redrawn, making it a little more Democrat. So it was unclear whether Garcia would hold on to his seat. And the other race I've been following is the mayoral race here in LA. And as of the weekend, Karen Bass was pulling ahead by about 9,000 votes. So there's about 1 million votes yet to be counted in the county. So there's still, it's not, the dust hasn't settled.
And that's the key for a lot of these races. Who are the outstanding ballots? Are they more pro-Caruso? Are they more pro-Bass? And in these partisan races, are they more pro-Democrat? Are they more pro-Republican? You're seeing in the 41st district where Ken Calvert is facing a strong challenge from Will Rollins, the absentee ballot has been, he has been gaining votes, and he's taken the lead as a result of the absentee ballot batches coming in. And I think most observers believe he's going to ultimately win. So we will see. It's why California, it's become election month.
Yeah, Tim, it'll be interesting to see how these mail-in ballots influence the race, whether, who's mailing in, who's showing up at the polls. I usually mail in or request an absentee ballot because I'm never sure where I'm going to be during election day. But what do you do? Do you vote during election day?
I vote. It depends what's going on, but this time I voted Oh, I think I sent in my ballot about 2 weeks before Election Day. So I wanted to make sure it got there in time. And I like to mail it in. I have dropped it in the box before my local grocery store has a box in the store, but I like it just to mail it in.
I mailed it in a couple of weeks earlier too. So the question is, who's mailing them in? Are Republicans mailing them in, or are Republicans showing up at the polling place? Or it'll be interesting to see how the dynamic is for that type of voting. And there's probably not enough history there yet to really kind of understand how that influences the races and the vote.
And don't forget, in California, you have until, I believe it's 10 days after the election for election officials can receive your ballot, and it would still count as long as it was postmarked on Election Day. So, it's anyone's guess who those late votes will be. But I believe it is, becoming more of a trend that those who drop their ballot off on Election Day are more Republican leaning. And certainly those who vote in person at the county are more Republican leaning.
Well, I was also following the state controller race, and it was supposed to have been the statewide office race that a Republican would have had a chance to win, but Lanhee Chen did lose to Malia Cohen. And as you talked about, Kim, you wondered why the union machinery wasn't out there against Chen if he had a real fighting chance. And that stuck to me.
You could take it as Democrats being overconfident. And in this case, they were right. That I guess they really didn't feel the need to spend the tens of millions of dollars that you might expect they would just to secure this office. And unions really want to hold the controller's seat because that's who writes the checks. And so Lanhee Chen certainly did the best any Republican has done for statewide office, in over a decade, certainly. When all is said and done, he'll probably be up around 46% or maybe a little more even, and certainly he has a future ahead of him if he decides to go for another office in California. But yeah, at the end of the day, in a more favorable environment for Republicans, that he was able to run a moderately competitive race. But at the end of the day, the Democrats still won by high single digits.
So before we move on to the interview, just want to make a few announcements. We've got a couple of great speakers lined up for December. I've heard from our event manager, though, that seating is limited. So if you're interested, please sign up if you haven't already. On Thursday, December 1st, we're holding a luncheon in Newport Beach. Our speaker is Steve Hilton, host of Fox News' The Revolution. And some of you may know that Steve is a resident of California, and he's got a great podcast on California. So he'll be discussing some of the issues the state is facing, especially after these midterms. And also, many of you know that Steve follows UK politics. He was an advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron. So we can get an update on what's happening in the UK from Steve. And the following week, we're going to have Professor Chiron Skinner. That's December 6th. Chiron Skinner teaches foreign policy and politics at Pepperdine. And listeners may know that she was a foreign policy advisor to President Trump and really a superb scholar. So we hope to see everyone there. Christmas and Hanukkah are coming up, and it's holiday season. So we hope that everyone will come out to join us in the festivities, and at the same time have an opportunity to listen to some really terrific speakers. So without further ado, here's Clark Judge. Welcome to PRI's Next Round podcast, Clark.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
So let's jump right in and get your take on the overall election results. So Republicans didn't get the wave that so many pollsters predicted. Democrats believe that they were in for what Obama called during his term a shellacking. So try to unpack this for us.
Well, I think there were a number of factors the Republicans, and maybe the Democrats too, but not as much, didn't see about this election. I think the Democrats were more on top of it. This didn't just happen. One of the things they were on top of was the importance of early voting. I am told by one analyst that if you go about 4 weeks into early voting and look at the polls, then it's basically where things came out at the end. In other words, they were able to lock in a lot of votes that reflected the state of opinion early in the campaign, early at least in the voting, that changed later on. And the pollsters didn't pick that up, and the Republicans didn't pick that up. I think there was also a factor that we should have, that is fundamental to politics, but that the Republicans forgot, and I think the Democrats were on top of. They talked a lot about democracy. Now, for us Republicans, democracy means constitution and procedure and that sort of thing. And it's very important in how we think. Obviously, the Democrats have been critical of the procedures and the constitutions in recent years. But for the Democrats and for the audiences they were trying to reach, democracy probably meant abortion. And it probably meant access to abortion. When Republicans talked about abortion, they talked about a decision, the process, basically. The states will do it. And we just have to let the states work out. And, that means we all vote. For the Democrats, when they talked about abortion, they didn't, democracy, and abortion, they talked about your rights are taken away, which people heard as translated into, and also meant was what people heard when they heard the word democracy. Their voters heard. And so the two were talking in different languages, and the Republicans didn't catch on to how the Democrats' language was playing. Democrats were saying of abortion, they'll take it away. The Republicans should have been saying, okay, so you pounding hard on and against the position that Biden took on abortion, which seemed to disappear after he said it, which was abortion up to the moment of delivery, which is to say, what's the difference between the moment of delivery and an hour after the delivery or 2 hours after the delivery? In other words, it's really terribly unsettling, and would be if that were the issue, but it wasn't the issue. After he said that, which was heard by his most radical people and helped to energize them, what they talked about after that was simply access, and they talked in code, democracy, and we didn't pick up on that, and I think that was a big factor here. The Republicans needed to, and this is, I'll say this is something that Republicans have had a problem with recent election cycles, needed not just to say the economy is bad, but what were they going to do? And what were they going to do in terms that people saw a direct connection between what was proposed and what would benefit them. And the Republicans have not been good at this in recent elections. There's been a lot of, Donald Trump's last election. Think of Donald Trump's 3 elections, which would include the midterms in 2018. His first election was Make America Great Again. Okay, that's the slogan now, but it came with specific things he was going to do, including energy and trade and a number of other things, which the people he was trying to reach could visualize and understand as, yes, that's directly talking about what I'm concerned about, which at the time was a lot because of the problems of the Obama period. What was his midterm, which we lost? It was promises made, promises kept, but not a big talk about the future. And there was something similar to that in the 2020. So these are 3 things that I think we got wrong: the voting schedule and not understanding it, the language and not understanding their language, and that it meant something other than what they were saying to the people to whom they were trying to reach, and a stronger, more specific, more visualizable view of the future. Those are the 3 things I think we missed on, and they did not. So a bad year became a draw for them, and what should have been a very good year for us became a draw. And I'll say this, I didn't pick it up either.
Kind of building on this issue of the debate between the end of democracy and, Republican focus on the economy, high gas prices, inflation, all of those sorts of things, and crime in some states like New York. you've touched upon it a little bit, but as a communications expert, what do you think went right and what went wrong? Because certainly it seemed like the crime message worked in places like New York. And do you think it is a communications issue, or do you think, when talking about the future, I know they technically had one, but it didn't seem like Republicans had much of an agenda that they offered in nationally or in a lot of these key races.
Yeah, well, that's the point I'm making, that they didn't. And so you can say crime is bad, but what are you going to do about it in a way that speaks directly? One of the reasons DeSantis did so well is that he had an answer for what he would do about what he had done about it and what he would do about it. You'll remember that he fired a bunch of prosecutors who wouldn't prosecute criminals. He was talking specifically about more money for police and about not tolerating some of the things that were leading to crime. So, and he had a good record for keeping crime, stopping happening in Florida, what was happening in New York and other centers. So there has been a tendency in the Republican Party to talk about yesterday and think that that's enough, because obviously we're going to change things, or being vague about what you're going to change. You've got to ask yourself, what is it that people are hearing when you talk and when your opponent talks? And I don't think there's been enough understanding of that.
So, Clark, let's delve into what happened in Florida a little more. So, as you said, Governor DeSantis won handily, so did Senator Rubio. In addition, they flipped several congressional seats to the GOP. And Miami-Dade County, with a heavy Hispanic population, went solidly Republican. So are there lessons to be learned from Florida?
Sure. Of course, Florida also has the factor of a lot of people fleeing New York, but just keep in mind, you hear about that, but people flee California, and the worry is they'll take California to Texas, or they'll take it to Nevada. The fact that people leave an area doesn't mean that they'll vote in ways that preserve what it was about the area that they fled to and their reasons for fleeing to it. So that isn't enough of an issue, enough of an explanation. With DeSantis, I think he was repeatedly very specific in surprising in the things he did. And those surprises gave, and the inventiveness of some of what he did, including, for example, the prosecutors, and the way he handled the hurricane, all said this is a man who can do things, and he's got a team. That team included legislators, it included senators. Rubio, I think, is also very good at articulating not just a problem, but where to take things. And so, I'm influenced by in this, not only by the Trump campaigns, where, as I said, I think they fell down on this, but also going back to the Romney campaign. Somebody inside the Romney campaign told me, and this, I tell you this because I think it is a generic Republican problem too often, that there was a positive campaign. We're going to run a positive campaign of solutions camp, and there was a negative campaign of hit the other side camp, and they never got it. They were never reconciled, and as a result, speeches would be written for one group at the order of one group, and then canceled by the other, and vice versa. Well, that isn't unusual for a lot of Republican campaigns, and I think we never had that problem during the Reagan years, but it has been a case more since, say, the beginning of the Obama period. So we need to be more specific, more forward-looking, but not give up on on our indictment of what the Democrats are doing, but having an alternative that's specific and understandable. And when we say something, it's in a way that people hear what we mean, not what somebody else means.
So election night was certainly a surprising night for I think everybody watching their return. In a night of surprises, what race stands out to you as the biggest surprise of election 2022?
The extent of the losses in the Senate, and that we were getting, I think we did not understand, nor did the campaign understand in Pennsylvania, what was going on there at all. And that made the Oz versus Fetterman was always tight, but it seemed as though Oz had a lot of reasons for optimism. Fetterman's physical condition, his identification with the radical wing of his party, his poor performance in offices, but what I think was not understood was that Oz there are a lot of, some of them cultural, some of them manner, some of them a sketchier view of him as honest, coming out of both having moved from states across the border to Pennsylvania, but also from his time on television. There was a lot that I picked up of feeling that he was kind of like a snake oil salesman. Now, I never watched a Dr. Oz show all the way through, or even more than a minute or so of it. So I don't know what he was like on TV, but my sense is that there was a lot of distrust of him in the discussions and reports afterwards. And I suspect that the people who voted for him in the primaries didn't pick up on that either. The other surprise is how poorly generally those Trump, former President Trump aggressively supported. It was, in retrospect, not the best collection of candidates, each having some deficiencies in a different way, and it suggested poor judgment. And that was maybe more of a surprise than it should have been.
So, Clark, the presidential race started the day after the election with former President Trump said to be announcing his bid this week. So what are your thoughts on the lay of the land for the 2024 presidential race? Do you think Donald Trump will be challenged? And any advice for Mr. Trump or even the challengers?
Well, my feeling is Mr. Trump has displayed some awfully bad judgment since the end of the election. He may, I understand his disappointment, even his doubts. People say, oh, he lies about the outcome of the election. Well, he clearly believes what he's saying. And if you believe what you're saying, you may be delusional, you may be mistaken, but you're not lying. You're saying what you believe to be the case, and that's part of public debate. That's been lost in this period. But I think he's displayed some very poor judgment, including in some of the senatorial picks that he championed. He had a very powerful, as we all know, brand, if you will. I think that brand. Well, this is no insight. That brand is badly damaged right now, and I'm not sure how he gets it back. While Governor DeSantis's brand is very, very, he looks like he's full of good judgment and political judgment, and has recent political and policy triumphs that reinforce that. President Trump does not. So I think that this is a very different landscape today, and it's not news. I mean, we've all heard this. A very different landscape than it was as we record this. We're on Monday, so it's what it was last week at this time. So as to other candidates, Abbott in Texas, Cotton has taken himself out, Rick Scott, and Nikki Haley. Who would have thought, by the way, that we would have two candidates coming out of South Carolina, each of them viable, each of them appealing, and yet we do, which says a lot, I think must say a lot about the political culture of that state, political culture of Florida as well. We've got two potential, I don't think they'll go up against one another, but we have both Rubio and DeSantis, and we've got some other, Texas is very, very strong. One of our problems is And by the way, Ohio looks strong, and J.D. Vance looks strong. So one of our problems is we have some states where we're utterly shut out. One of the California being the obvious one. But we've also seen in this election that although the governorship of New York didn't flip, we've seen a stronger Republican performance in New York than we've seen in a long time. Congressional seats flipping, a relatively close run for governor. Is it enough? Is that the springboard for going for the next campaign and for actually being competitive? Well, we were competitive this time in New York. Is it a springboard for having real victories in New York? I don't know. But the other day on television, one of the Democratic people said, well, pundits said, well, the Republican brand is toxic. Well, it wasn't toxic in New York. It was difficult, but it's been difficult for a long time. It wasn't toxic in Florida. It wasn't toxic in a lot of places. There's another factor, and I don't know if this is true or not, but Newt Gingrich contends that the popular vote for in this last election, and that I presume means the vote for the Congress, because it's the one place where you get the entire country voting. You don't with the Senate, and obviously not every state has a governor up. But according to Newt Gingrich, the popular vote favored the Republicans by 6 million. So it was sort of a flip of what happened in 2016, where because of the Electoral College, the presidency went to Trump. In other words, there were strong areas, and they were enough strong that it overcame the popular vote. That we're seeing now that the Senate or the House may have produced a very close race, but the popular vote was not close, and it favored the Republicans. I haven't checked those numbers out. But that also suggests that there's a lot going on here that we have yet to process, and but it's not all one-sided. The difficulty is, I think we're going to have enough to stop the Democrats from doing bad things, but in the coming Congress, but who knows? I mean, this is a tough situation, and there is at least remains a little bit of a chance that they may actually get a speakership, which means they get the congressional committee chairs too and control the agenda.
So before the midterms, President Biden was, I guess we could charitably say, was a political hot potato, with many in his own party sidestepping the question when they were asked whether they supported him for a second term. So now that Democrats have done a pretty good job by all accounts in mitigating their losses during these midterms, what are your thoughts on his prospects? Do you think Biden is going to run again?
It depends a bit on what's going on with Biden. If he's in a cognitively deteriorating condition right now, even a strong midterm won't overcome that, and it'll become more pronounced. I sometimes wonder how much of it was an act. I mean, he has looked better since the election in a way that he didn't look before the election. They may have not wanted him to be too vocal. I think certainly not certainly, but I think part of putting him in the basement during 2020 was not so much to prevent a contrast as with Fetterman versus Oz and Fetterman's abilities to respond, so much as let's make the campaign Donald Trump versus Donald Trump. And I think that strategy continued. This one, he came out only at times when he was sort of stroking the midterm version of that, running the fascist stuff and all that, which was, I think, reprehensible, but that's another matter. So I think that it's a little far-fetched to say it was all an act, but he looks better after the election. He looks, first of all, he sounds more coherent. He doesn't seem to be wandering around lost on stages, but he's, and that may just be a kind of sort of a charge, you become more energetic when you feel things are going your way, and he may be that way. It's hard for me to imagine that the Joe Biden we've seen over the last year is capable of handling the presidency another time, another 4 years, and that wouldn't be a dangerous thing for us for him to be put in the presidency for another 4 years, dangerous for the country, but just on the basis of cognitive ability. But I think he's still damaged goods, and he has a ways to go to prove that he isn't, and to be a viable candidate.
So come January, President Biden still has veto power over any legislation proposed by Republicans. How do you think Republicans' strategy should they take for making the most of this Congress?
Next Congress, they should be putting out an agenda. They can start putting it out now, but it seems right now the best thing they can do is try to stop things and start to articulate alternatives. They can also ask themselves, where are our weak points? Why are we weak to the point of losing these races, so many of them? Are we are we truly weak? And they need to, I'd say the big things they have to do are not so much public as private, internal, figuring out, coming to terms with what they lost and why. But not so much that they, not so hard on themselves that they don't see the areas where they have strength, and starting to articulate things in ways that deal with those strengths. One thing for sure is that Republican voters want to see Republican office holders taking strong and clear stands, and being champions of the things that the party has really, to a large extent, long stood on, including some of the new issues. They need to give a sense of conviction and a sense of the future, how they see the future in ways that people can understand. But they also need to understand to what degree and in what way they lost. And as I say, is it a matter of the gerrymandering and all going against us? Not gerrymandering, but the selection of states, the way the districts were drawn. Is it just a matter like that? Sort of that's part of the legislation of legislative politics. Your districts are drawn, but they shouldn't have gone this way. Why? State by state, district by district. And understanding how to frame issues so that people can visualize, so that the choices people have are the choices that are not echoing the caricatures of the other side, but are defining our side and those Republican side, conservative side, and doing it in a way that speaks to people of all backgrounds. There's a lot of work to do.
So let's turn a moment to California. So if President Biden does not run, we've certainly got a governor here waiting in the wings, chomping at the bit. What are your thoughts on Governor Newsom's prospects, and what do you think of his strategy of the past several months, campaigning against Governor DeSantis and Florida and Governor Abbott and Texas? He's seemingly focusing his efforts on promoting what he sees as liberal California's virtues to a national audience.
Yeah, he comes across as a bully, a guy who wants to push California on the rest of the country when much of the rest of the country wants no part of it. I think he doesn't have a record of California as a good place getting to be a better place to live that DeSantis has and that Greg Abbott has. So he is part of the problem, and I think he's transparently part of the problem. He needs to have a reality check. And the reality right now is you go in with to a national campaign as the guy whose state, in part for your policies, not just Biden's, has brownouts, that has massive wildfires, that has wokeness in a way that's anathema to a lot of the country, that has failing schools, that has failing just about everything where the state government touches things. Crime is out of control. You just have to turn a camera on in L.A. or San Francisco. I mean, you get street cameras. I don't know if they're in L.A. and San Francisco, but in a lot of the country, you can just Google a city and get onto the cameras that are posted around the city for security reasons and all, and see what life is like there. And it's not pretty in California. I think that Gavin Newsom is digging himself in a very foolish way. But having said that, he would listen to me and say, yeah, you're one of those guys we just ended up wiping away and dismissing that. I think he would be wrong to do that. I think he's not a viable candidate because his state is not to the rest of the country an attractive state anymore. And given what it was and what it is, that's a really unsettling comparison. Are we going to have that with the whole country? I think an awful lot of people are going, like most of the country will say, no, we don't want that. And that's so he doesn't get that. And the one final thing about him, besides being hypocritical, like with French Laundry and all that, it's been pointed out that the governors who did best in re-election were the ones who put a stop to COVID shutdown. He's been just the opposite. He's been in the tank all the way on that. No moderation at all, and no sense of the cost he was inflicting on the people of the state. So I think that this is a very, very weak candidate, and one that would basically, after last Tuesday, I'm not going to say anybody is a sure thing in any way for us, but he's sort of like our ideal candidate. Everything that people dislike about the left wing of the Democratic Party and about California.
So, Clark, last question. So there are others waiting in the wings, Vice President Kamala Harris, Mayor Pete for the Dems, and DeSantis and Pompeo, and for the Republicans, for these would-be contenders to be ready to answer the door. What is the strategy if should opportunity knock?
The strategy for, and I would say that Vice President Harris she has had such a her public personality is not a strong one now. The worst thing that was said about her was said by Willie Brown, who she was very close to, as we know, at one point, personally as well as politically. He said, yes, we had a beautiful relationship. She loved me and I loved me, he said. And that's that was a kind of slap and dismissal. And I just don't think that she's a viable candidate. Governor Newsom, I do think, is in a Democratic environment. Mayor Pete, there's nothing that he's done that is compelling. On the other hand, I hesitate to say that because I would have said that about an awful lot of candidates this last time on the Democratic side, and they pulled it out. So as to DeSantis, he and Pompeo have both been defining themselves very well. DeSantis is in a stronger position because he is a governor who can do things and does do things, and does them in a dramatic way. The shipping the immigrants up to Martha's Vineyard, so that the people there who are seen as by the rest of the country as tremendously sanctimonious about these kinds of immigration issues, so long as they're in other people's towns. And so what did they do? They moved move the people out immediately. That's the sort of thing, that kind of action by DeSantis is the sort of thing that defines an issue and defines it sharply and lets the other side react in a way that defines it, confirms what you're saying. That he shows a lot of shrewdness in how he's going about getting going on this. Secretary Pompeo hasn't had the same platform. He's got a harder road to travel, but he needs to define himself both domestically and in foreign ways. And he's got a great deal of credibility now in foreign issues for his time as Secretary of State, which was very good. Then we have the others. I mentioned Nikki Haley. I mentioned Tim Scott, and all of these people need to define themselves. I'm told that Ambassador Haley or Governor Haley, whichever you call her, is now very impressive on the giving speeches and answering questions. I think it took her a while to learn that sort of thing on a national level, and she apparently has. I felt the same thing about Senator Scott when he was on television on election night. He showed a lot of confidence and strength that he seemed much more than before, and he's very likable. But he also had the feeling of a leader. DeSantis has the feeling of a leader. Haley has a feeling of a leader. Pompeo does too. I'm not sure that in that case that Harris or Newsom or Mayor Pete, as you say, gives that feeling quite so much right now. But again, after the last week's outcome, I'm not sure that we can be confident that our readings from someone like myself are as reliable as they might be.
Well, thank you so much, Clark. You added tremendous insight, and we always love to have you back to unpack all of this for us. Thanks again.
It's always a pleasure.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.